Hi and welcome to Historical Horror. This week's horror is about the horror that can be caused by dancing. And no, I don't mean it's going to be an analysis of the moves of John Travolta, though they can be quite horrific. I mean genuine dancing back in the day that caused 100 people to lose their lives. This might not be quite as gruesome as some of my stories, but it is still pretty horrifying. So this time, snacks are fine. Eat away, but just maybe don't get up and boogie until it's done. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, quite a few people were causing trouble. The problem was that the ruling 21 who governed the city, and who, in a massive calculating error, were actually made up of more than 21 people, weren't fans of turmoil. They wanted a calm and orderly city that God could smile down upon. But Strasbourg had been far from calm for quite some time. They usually dealt with disturbances pretty quickly, but this one was a little bit weird. The problem was that everywhere from the pretty town squares to the feces-covered streets where the peasants and gentry alike defecated and threw their crap, to the back alleys thick with the blood of newly slaughtered animals, men, women and children were dancing with no sign of stopping. This wasn't the usual celebratory dancing to which the ruling classes turned a blind eye like Carnival. There was no singing, no drums, no songs filling the air. It wasn't an expression of joy. This dancing was different, sinister, contagious. Hundreds of people are entering a trance-like state and dancing day and night, often until they collapsed and died from either starvation, thirst or exhaustion. It was a dancing plague. The whole event was set in motion by one woman. Her first name has been lost to history, but we know her as Frau Troffea. According to sources, she started her horrific ballet on June the 14th of that year. She just started moving, couldn't stop. Occasionally, she'd break out of her trance to beg for help before returning to hopping, twirling and skipping until she collapsed from exhaustion and fell asleep. But as soon as she woke up again, she got back down with her bad self, drawing onlookers from across the city. Many in the crowd seemed to think that St. Vitus had cursed her. Vitus had become famous for withstanding all the tortures that the Romans could throw at him back in 303 CE, ironically just a decade or so before Constantine made Christianity legal. According to the story, they tried to boil him in oil, but that didn't work. Then they tried to get him savaged by a lion, but the lion seemed to quite like him. Then they put him in a room with half a dozen, let's call them willing maidens, hoping that the joys they offered would turn him back to the pagan gods. But St. Vitus held firm. At least his conviction did. We have no record as to what the maidens did to other parts of his body. Eventually, the endless rounds of torture took Vitus's life. But, the story goes, only after he asked God to be allowed to die. After that, he became venerated as the patron saint of, amongst other things, dancers. The celebration on his saint's day involved dancing near his statue and a cult grew up around his memory. As well as enjoying dance, the saint was said to occasionally inflict a curse on people. St. Vitus's curse was the uncontrollable urge to move until you have cleansed all your sins. This cult was almost certainly active in Strasbourg because St. Vitus had an important shrine in a church nearby. The church to which Frau Troffea was taken to be cured. It seemed fitting to the onlookers at the time that they might put the still dancing Frau into the back of a cart and nip her up to St. Vitus's shrine. Then, with a bit of luck, some repentance and a few good prayers, he might cure her. Whether he did or didn't, we don't know. What we do know is that by then it was too late. Her dancing had become an infection, and before long hundreds of people had slipped into the same trance. It looked like St. Vitus wasn't just punishing one woman, but a whole city. The ruling classes were, of course, terrified, so they had to find a solution. What the people at the time didn't realise is that there were a whole bunch of factors that led to the dancing. If you want to know the sciencey details, I'll be releasing a video about that to members, but for now, let's just say the world was a scary place. Disease was everywhere, a little ice age had caused terrible famines, and a new sort of Christianity called Protestantism had popped up, leading to some of the bloodiest wars in European history. Even the shape of the world as they knew it had changed, and no, not from flat to round. Even back then, only the town fool thought the earth was flat, and he only said it to make people laugh. It was because they'd found a massive great continent over to the west, proving that the Bible and Aristotle didn't know everything. Some very influential people really thought that all this meant that the end of the world was nigh. Life was tough and pretty scary in Strasbourg and much of Europe, but if there's one thing we humans are good at, it's finding a way to cheer ourselves up. A great way to do that was Carnival. At Carnival, the ordinary people would blow off steam by drinking, singing and dressing up. The town fool would be declared lord for a day and, most importantly, everybody would be overcome by a desire to dance as if their lives depended on it. In Strasbourg, Carnival happened every year at Lent, and they would also dance at any other time that they could find an excuse. The sacraments, or rather the Catholic holy days of baptism, Eucharist, confirmation, the ordination of a new priest, and even a funeral would provide a reason to dance. Another good day to dance was a saint's day. The people would take any excuse they could to shake free from their brutish lives, if only for a moment. For the peasants of Strasbourg in the 16th century, they had, on one hand, a strong belief in the curse of St. Vitus, and on the other hand, the only way they really were allowed to release tension was through dancing. Carnival was how they would get rid of their pent-up fears and deep-seated anxieties. For Frau Troffea, something seems to have pushed her over the edge. Something seemed to have made it so she couldn't stop dancing, so that she had to let this out. And with her followed a town of people who were as frightened as hell that the end of the world was nigh and couldn't take it anymore. There's a deeper psychology here, but again, in the interest of not boring everyone, I'll leave that to my special members' Science Bite. Join if you're as big a nerd as I am. But buried deep in her mind was a subconscious urge to dance to get rid of the stress, so she did, and that triggered others to do the same. Of course, none of the psychology would have been known to people at the time. All the people of the time knew, particularly the elites, is that it was a nuisance. Contemporary sources claimed as many as 15 people were succumbing to the plague every day. This put the dancing plague right up there with many of the other time's terrifying epidemics, including the plague. It was likely self-fulfilling. The added terror of this new, strange curse may well have increased the number of dancers. Thankfully, the ruling 21 plus had a plan. You see, this wasn't the only dancing mania in history. There had been a similar dancing play recorded in the Saxon town of Kreuzberg in roughly 1017, and there had been some others across the areas bordering Germany and France in 1374. Back then, these manias were thought to be some sort of possession or affliction. They were dealt with using prayer and exorcism to remove the demons causing the disease. But by the time Frau Troffea was strutting her funky stuff, ideas had moved on. Kind of. In 1508, most general medicine was based on the work of Greek physician Aelius Galenaeus of Pergamon, or Galen to his pals. Galen borrowed from Hippocrates in that he thought the body was made up of 4 humours. We mentioned this in an earlier episode, so apologies if you think I'm repeating myself. But for anyone new, they were the wet and warm sanguine, or blood, wet and cold melania coli, or black bile, or rather poop, that caused melancholy generally when you had too much, warm and dry xanthic coli, or yellow bile, or rather vomit, and cold and wet phlegm, which is exactly what it says on the tin. To Galen, illness, including mental and emotional illness, was caused by an imbalance in those humours. At the time of Frau Troffea, her dancing was a medical issue, not a spiritual one. The Physicians' Guild held some sway in the town, and some were members of the 21. And their fantastic cure for the dancing plague? Let them dance. Just that. On these doctors' say-so, the guild halls were cleared to house the unchoreographed masses. Grey markets were emptied to allow space for the afflicted to gyrate, jump and spin. Stages were built where mule trading usually took place, and musicians and refreshments were arranged to accompany the hordes of helpless one-person boogie machines from across the city. The conclusion the physicians had come to was that the dancers' sanguine, their blood, had got out of control. They were getting really hot from an overabundance of blood, and it was cooking their brains, they thought. It certainly met observations. Their bodies were warm, often drenched with sweat. Their actions, as was expected from the overly sanguinous, looked like uncontrolled manic joy. But there was a problem. Typically, the treatment would be to open up a vein and let out some of the blood. But you couldn't do that when someone was moving about. So, they thought, in a move that would seem bizarre even to Galen, the victim should be allowed to burn off the excess heat. The thought was that the heat cooking their brains might also be caused by some kind of blockage, where blood had become congealed and couldn't get out of their systems. A bit of gyrating might be all that's required to unblock these passages and get everything flowing freely again. This would make them calm again and remove what many people still believed was the affliction of St. Vitus's curse. You see, just because a disorder could be understood naturally, it didn't mean its cause wasn't supernatural or demonic. Even the most educated of men still saw the world as one of angels and demons in the 16th century. They just believed they better knew the mechanics of how the demons acted on us. One physician who came to town much later thought he knew how it all started. His name was Philippus Aureolus Theophratus Bombastus von Homhain. Thankfully, people tended to shorten that to Paracelsus. He, because he was a bit of a misogynist and an all-round jerk by all accounts, believed that it was significant that patient zero was a woman. He claimed that the trigger for Frau Troffea was likely a need to take revenge on something her husband did. Other women then realised that this was a great way to get back at their fellas, and they joined in. Before long, the trick had backfired, as the first of two maladies that he called levitas animae, or recklessness of mind, made them want to dance more, opening their laughing veins. The rupture that was caused by this allowed excess sanguine to spread throughout the body and create a second illness, chlorea lasciva, or lascivious disease. It served them right, Paracelsus thought. He really didn't like women. If men danced too, that was the fault of the women, just as the fall had been the fault of Eve. Some historians claim it came from a self-loathing, because secretly he was born into sex. Not something that was easy to be at that time in history. It would have been deeply stigmatising for a religious, educated man like Paracelsus, assuming the evidence does actually point that way, of course. He might have just been a jerk. Of course, the idea that this was all caused by hot-blooded women and could be cured by more dancing was terrible. Putting those same dancers on display only made things worse, as the number of dancers increased up to 400 people, eventually killing as many as 100. In the end, they changed tack. The music stopped, the stages were torn down, and the whole approach went religious again. The afflicted were led to the shrine of St. Vitus, where they were blessed by the priests, and forgiveness for their sins was requested. Some reports suggest that the afflicted were given symbolic red shoes. If true, this could be the origins of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Red Shoes, in which a girl's shoes are cursed to make the wearer's feet dance, even after they've been chopped off. This ritual, red shoes or not, seemed to work. Maybe the dancers needed some kind of other ritual to give them comfort in those trying times. Something familiar to release the stress that was causing the dancing. What makes this a particular horror is that there are things like that in all of our subconsciouses, things that can just present themselves and come out when we're under stress. I wonder what you think yours might be. Or have you ever found yourself with an overwhelming urge to get down on it, then get up and strut your funky stuff? Sober, that is. I'd really love to know. Thanks once again for getting this far. Please do give a like so the saints of YouTube smile kindly on me, and please do shimmy over to the sub button if you haven't for more groovacious content in the future. And as I mentioned, members, usually who are executive producers, but for the next one I'm going to make an exception, it'll be all members, get to see my deeper dive videos as well as loads of other stuff, including getting to see the videos early, see live streams and so on. This all helps me make the channel as good as I can make it for you. So, thank you.